Okay, so in this lesson, I'm going to go over the story of stuff and sustainable consumption. And the two main concepts from the story of stuff are perceived obsolescence and planned obsolescence, and also this concept of sustainable consumption. I'm going to go a very brief introduction of that. Okay, so first let's watch this video here from Annie Leonard, I believe her name is. So this is a pretty famous video actually that's been around for a while. Let me expand the screen real quick. And this is actually part of a larger video, so this is only one little snippet. And apologize in advance, this is an older video. It's a little bit pixelated here, but the message is the important part here, not the animation per se.
And that brings us to the golden arrow of consumption. This is the heart of the system, the engine that drives it. It is so important that protecting this arrow has become the top priority for both of these guys. That's why after 9/11, when our country was in shock, and President Bush could have suggested any number of appropriate things, to grieve, to pray, to hope. No, he said to shop, to shop. We have become a nation of consumers. Our primary identity has become that of being consumers, not mothers, teachers, farmers, but consumers. The primary way that our value is measured and demonstrated is by how much we contribute to this arrow, how much we consume. And do we? We shop and shop and shop, keep the materials flowing, and flow they do. Guess what percentage of total materials flow through this system is still in product or use 6 months after their date of sale in North America? 50%? 20? No, 1%. 1. In other words, 99% of the stuff we harvest, mine, process, transport, 99% of the stuff we run through this system is trashed within 6 months. Now, how can we run a planet with that level of materials throughput? It wasn't always like this. The average U.S. person now consumes twice as much as they did 50 years ago. Ask your grandma. In her day, stewardship and resourcefulness and thrift were valued. So how did this happen? Well, it didn't just happen. It was designed. Shortly after World War II, these guys were figuring out how to ramp up the economy. Retailing analyst Victor Lebeau articulated the solution that's become the norm for the whole system. He said, our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and use of goods into rituals, that we seek our spiritual satisfaction, our ego satisfaction in consumption. We need things consumed, burned up, replaced, and discarded at an ever-accelerating rate. President Eisenhower's Council of Economic Advisors chairman said that the American economy's ultimate purpose is to produce more consumer goods. More consumer goods? Our ultimate purpose? Not provide health care or education or safe transportation or sustainability or justice? Consumer get us to jump on board this program so enthusiastically. Well, two of their most effective strategies are planned obsolescence and perceived obsolescence. Planned obsolescence is another word for designed for the dump. It means they actually make stuff to be useless as quickly as possible, so we'll chuck it and buy a new one. It's obvious with things like plastic bags and coffee cups, but now it's even big stuff. Mops, DVDs, cameras, barbecues even, everything. Even computers. Have you noticed that when you buy a computer now, the technology is changing so fast that in just a couple of years, it's actually an impediment to communication? I was curious about this, so I opened up a big desktop computer to see what was inside. And I found out that the piece that changes each year is just a tiny little piece in the corner. But you can't just change that one piece because each new version is a different shape. So you gotta chuck the whole thing and buy a new one. So I was reading industrial design journals from the 1950s when planned obsolescence was really catching on. These designers are so open about it. They actually discuss how fast can they make stuff break that still leaves the consumer having enough faith in the product to go out and buy another one. It was so intentional. But stuff cannot break fast enough to keep this arrow afloat. So there's also perceived obsolescence. Now, perceived obsolescence convinces us to throw away stuff that is still perfectly useful. How do they do that? Well, they change the way the stuff looks. So if you bought your stuff a couple of years ago, everyone can tell that you haven't contributed to this arrow recently. And since the way we demonstrate our value is contributing to this arrow, it can be embarrassing. Like, I've had the same fat white computer monitor on my desk for 5 years. My coworker just got a new computer. She has a flat, shiny, sleek monitor. It matches her computer, it matches her phone, even her pen stand. She looks like she's driving in Spaceship Central, and I look like I've got a washing machine on my desk. Fashion is another prime example of this. Have you ever wondered why women's shoe heels go from fat one year to skinny the next to fat to skinny? It's not because there's some debate about which heel structure is the most healthy for women's feet. It's because wearing fat heels in a skinny heel year shows everybody that you haven't contributed to that arrow as recently, so you're not as valuable as that person in skinny heels next to you, or more likely in some ad. It's to keep us buying new shoes. Advertisements and media in general plays a big role in this. Each of us in the U.S. is targeted with over 3,000 advertisements a day. We see more advertisements in 1 year than people 50 years ago saw in a lifetime. And if you think about it, what's the point of an ad except to make us unhappy with what we have? So 3,000 times a day, we're told our hair is wrong, our skin is wrong, our clothes are wrong, our furniture is wrong, our car is wrong, we are wrong, but it can all be made right if we just go shopping. Media also helps by hiding all of this and all of this. So the only part of the materials economy we see is the shopping. The extraction, production, and disposal all happens outside of our field of vision. So in the U.S., we have more stuff than ever before, but polls show that our national happiness is actually declining. Our national happiness peaked in the 1950s, the same time that this consumption mania exploded. Interesting coincidence. I think I know why. We have more stuff, but we have less time for the things that really make us happy. Friends, family, leisure time. We're working harder than ever. Some analysts say we have less leisure time than any time since feudal society. And do you know what the two main activities are that we do with the scant leisure time we have? Watch TV and shop. In the US, we spend 3 to 4 times as many hours shopping as our counterparts in Europe do. So we're in this ridiculous situation where we go to work, maybe 2 jobs even, and we come home and we're exhausted, so we plop down on our new couch and watch TV, and the commercials tell us you suck, so you gotta go to the mall to buy something to feel better, and then you gotta go to work more to pay for the stuff you just bought, so you come home and you're more tired, so you sit down and you watch more TV, and it tells you to go to the mall again, and we're on this crazy work, watch, spend treadmill, and we could just stop.
Okay, so a lot of those themes should seem very, very familiar. Let me go back to this.
In the U.S., we have more stuff than ever.
So I just wanted to highlight the treadmill of consumption should be pretty apparent here. She, at the very end of the video, basically, in some ways, illustrated the treadmill that we just keep buying more and more stuff. We consume more and more goods, and yet we're not happy. She spoke to the fact that advertising makes you unhappy. This is that whole in the treadmill of consumption. So this is the consumption. She keeps referring to this arrow, and that's all consumption. And so what she also referred to all of the negative aspects, the negative environmental aspects of this, when she mentioned that they sort of hide all of the manufacturing and the waste and pollution and all that sort of thing. And so she hit on an awful lot of themes that we've discussed here. And I think makes some really good points. I think it's hard to argue against most of these points. So let's go over a few things here that are the two of the things that I really wanted to go into are planned obsolescence and perceived obsolescence. So planned obsolescence is this, what she terms designed for the dump. In other words, things are not built to last a long time anymore. And I think, again, this is something that I think is pretty apparent if you sit down and think about it, or if you're going somewhere through a suburban or urban or even rural area, and you see the proliferation of dollar stores, right? So cheap stuff. Walmart sells a lot of cheap things, but the stuff that they sell, generally speaking, does not last a really long time. And it's kind of this interesting psychological formula where a company wants you to buy more and more of their stuff, but they don't want you to think that they still want you to think that you're getting a deal and that you're getting your money's worth. So there's this sort of what you referred to in the industrial journals in the 50s where they were figuring this out. There's this sort of sweet spot where you're like, okay, well, it's cheap. I know it's not going to last a really long time, but it lasts long enough, just long enough that it's worth it. And that's the kind of point that manufacturers are trying to get to, because they really do want you to buy more stuff. And all that, that she was mentioning was, there was a very deliberate push to increase consumption in the post-World War II period, after we had this industrial capacity expanded, and we had the baby boomers coming home, we had all this population. So there was a lot of different things that were pushed purposefully to drive the economy. And a really big one was that consumption, that golden arrow that she mentions. So one way they can do that is do planned obsolescence, where things wear out relatively quickly. The second one is perceived obsolescence, and that's the one where we refer to as the easiest thing to think about here is how fashions change, right? And this is kind of referred to with the treadmill of consumption earlier. The keeping up with the Joneses part is that the quote-unquote Joneses, they keep changing. Like, so things go out of fashion, they go out of style, and so in order to keep up with the latest fashions, you have to buy more and more stuff. And again, this is deliberate. This is deliberately done by designers, manufacturers, the fashion world folks. They want to drive sales, so they sort of push out these newer trends. And there's all kinds of research on this. It's actually kind of an open secret in the fashion world. They just keep changing things to keep things moving and sort of sell more stuff. But that's your perceived obsolescence and planned obsolescence, which are two really important concepts here. And so the last thing, and I'm just going to go over this really quickly, there's a whole literature on this. This is a whole field of research and study and application, this notion of sustainable consumption. So sustainable consumption can be thought of as this consumption of goods and services that have minimal impact on the environment, are socially equitable, economically viable, whilst meeting the basic needs of humans worldwide. So again, like sustainability, there's no one single definition of sustainable consumption, but the point of sustainable consumption is to try to establish an economy that has minimal impact on sustainability from the whole 3E perspective that we've been discussing all semester. So this should look a lot like your steady state economy, stuff that Herman Daly was talking about, that William Rees was talking about. So this concept, it's out there, and there are people that are pushing to try to develop an economy that can actually meet all of these sustainability objectives while still providing, people's basic needs. So they're really big barriers to this. And again, this is from the article that you had posted, but there's a lot here. Lack of awareness. I mean, most people, how many people, think about it, how many people do you think actually understand how big of a problem consumerism is, and even materialism? So lack of awareness is really important. How many people, do you think know all of the sustainability impacts of all the goods that we produce? There's this lack of support in general. Again, we're sort of socialized to believe that we need to be fashionable, we need to have the latest stuff, and that need isn't necessarily what drives our consumption. Again, we talked about earlier, externalities, this reluctance or outright refusal to include the true environmental and social costs of consumption. This ingrained unsustainable thinking, I mean, a lot of this boils down to habits, and one of the best ways that you can address some of these sustainability issues are to develop different habits. And our habits now are, my shirt's a little out of fashion, I need to buy something. Whatever, I like this car, even though this SUV that gets 25 miles a gallon, I don't need it, but I like it, not thinking about using a more efficient vehicle. So all of these things, developing these behavior patterns are really important, and just in general, lack of alternatives. I mean, it's hard to find. I mean, just go, when next time you drive to work or school or wherever, just take a look at all of the SUVs on the road, and how many of them are, have one person in the driver's seat. How many of them do you think actually use that to go anywhere, off-road or anywhere that actually requires the use of an SUV? And that's just one, that's just one example, but that's a really big barrier to this. If there were fewer opportunities to engage in unsustainable consumption, then there would be more sustainable consumption. Okay, so that's it for this lesson.